My wife, Vivian, was gone. Just a few hours earlier, I had stood under the shade of a wide Georgia oak tree and watched as we laid her to rest. The ground was still fresh, the scent of magnolia clinging to my black suit like a memory I couldn't wash away. And now, instead of being home, instead of sitting quietly with my grief, I was in the cold, sterile boardroom of the company I had built with my own two hands. The polished mahogany table stretched out in front of me, and the walls around me carried framed photos of the things I had worked my whole life to create: skyscrapers, bridges, schools, and community centers. Each photo told a story, not just of construction, but of sacrifice, sweat, and dreams that had come true. The company was called Vance & Sons Construction, but as I sat there, staring at that name, the "& Sons" part felt like a bitter joke. To my right sat an empty leather chair. Vivian's chair. For 40 years she had been there beside me, through every major decision. She never said much during meetings, but her presence was a compass for me. A small narrowing of her eyes would mean, "Be careful." A soft nod would mean, "Trust yourself." She had guided me through storms with nothing more than her steady gaze. Now that chair was empty, and the silence of her absence pressed on me like a physical weight. I missed her glance more than I missed breathing. Across from me sat my daughter-in-law, Jessica. She was perfectly composed, dressed in a sharp black pantsuit that probably cost more than my first car. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a bun so tight I wondered if it hurt. Her lips were painted a harsh red, and her smile was colder than steel. She looked at me the way a predator looks at prey, and when she spoke, her words cut like shards of ice. "Now that the old woman is gone," she said, her tone casual but cruel, "you'll put the company in my son's name. Then you can take care of yourself however you like." She said it as if it were already decided, as if my wife's death had erased everything I had built, everything I had earned, and handed it neatly to her and her boy. Beside her, my son Marcus sat hunched over, staring at the table as though the wood grain might offer him answers. He was 48 years old, but in that moment, he looked like a child, small and unsure. He had always bent to Jessica's will, always waited for her approval before he dared speak. He couldn't even lift his eyes to meet mine. Then there was my grandson, Liam, 21 years old, slouched in his chair with his thumbs moving quickly over his phone, hidden under the table. He had barely looked up all day. Not at the funeral. Not at me. Not even at the photographs of his grandmother that had been placed by her casket. To him, her death had been nothing more than an interruption of his weekend plans. He hadn't shed a tear, hadn't even pretended to care. They weren't here to mourn. They weren't here to honor Vivian's life or comfort me in my grief. They were here for one reason: to take. I saw it in Jessica's eyes as they swept across the room, not with sadness, but with calculation. She wasn't seeing memories or achievements. She was seeing numbers, properties, assets, a kingdom she thought was about to be handed over. But she was wrong. They thought Vivian's death had left me weak. They thought grief had hollowed me out and left me vulnerable. What they didn't know was that my wife had left me something far greater than money or land, something they had no idea even existed. In the final months of her illness, when Jessica and Marcus had started showing up less often, when their questions had shifted from "How are you feeling?" to "Have the property deeds been updated?" Vivian had quietly prepared her final gift to me. It wasn't written in her will. It wasn't in the official papers that Jessica had been so eager to get her hands on. It was in a small, secret box she had hidden away. And now, the lawyer who was about to walk through that door wasn't just carrying legal documents. He was carrying proof. Proof in the form of a DNA test. Proof that would set fire to everything Jessica thought she had already claimed. Proof that would burn their carefully planned future to the ground. The silence in the boardroom grew heavy, thicker than the August humidity in Atlanta. I sat at the head of the table, my hands resting on the cool wood, and waited. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. Instead, I smiled. Because while they were already dividing my life's work like vultures over a carcass, I knew something they didn't. And when the truth came through that door, nothing, nothing would ever be the same again. They didn't see a dying woman as a wife, mother, or grandmother. To them, Vivian had been nothing but an obstacle in their way. And now, with her gone, they looked at me the same way, as an aging gatekeeper standing between them and what they believed was theirs. They waited for me to break, for me to sigh, to give in, to sign away everything. But I didn't. I stayed silent. I let the weight of the quiet fill the room, stretch long and heavy, until it was no longer my burden but theirs. Silence became my weapon, and I watched it work. Finally, Jessica cleared her throat. The sound was sharp in the stillness, like a pebble dropped into a pond. She straightened her back, her voice coated with a sweetness that was so false it almost made me laugh. "Samuel," she began, slow and careful, "we know how incredibly difficult this is for you. Vivian's passing is a tremendous loss for all of us." She paused, waiting, expecting one of them, Marcus, maybe, or even Liam, to nod or echo her words. But no one did. The silence stretched again, thick and uncomfortable. Jessica pressed on. "The company needs to move forward. The board is getting anxious. It's time for you to rest." With a practiced flourish, she slid a thick folder across the table. The leather folder whispered across the polished wood before stopping neatly in front of me. "These are the transfer documents," she explained smoothly. "It's all very straightforward. You'll sign over your controlling shares, as well as the CEO position, to Marcus. We've also drafted a motion to give Liam a seat on the board once he graduates. It's the best way to ensure the family legacy remains secure." Her voice was calm, certain, like she was handing me my own sentence. Marcus finally looked up from the table. His eyes, tired and pleading, met mine. His voice was low, unsteady, but he forced strength into it. "Dad," he said, clearing his throat, "it's the right thing to do. It's what Mom would have wanted." For just a second, I saw the boy he used to be, the little boy who once followed me around construction sites wearing a toy hard hat, always trying to carry tools too big for his hands. For a second, I saw my son, but that boy was gone. In his place was a man too weak to stand without his wife's approval, too willing to be led by her voice instead of his own. I held his gaze and asked quietly, "Are you sure that's what your mother would have wanted, son?" The room grew still. A small, knowing smirk curved Jessica's lips. She leaned forward, her voice stripped of its sugar, sharpened into steel. "Now that the old woman is gone," she said coldly, each word as deliberate as a knife, "you will sign the papers. Put the company in my son's name and fend for yourself. You're old, Samuel. Stop being a burden to us." The audacity of her words was almost breathtaking. They weren't just asking for the company. They weren't even asking for control. They were trying to erase me, to cast me aside like a broken tool after a lifetime of building. But instead of rage, instead of pain, I felt something else, a deep, steady calm, a certainty that settled over me like armor. Vivian had seen this. She had known this would happen. She had prepared me for it. I looked at their faces, Jessica's cold confidence, Marcus's uneasy stare, Liam's disinterested smirk, and I smiled. It wasn't wide, just a faint twitch at the corner of my mouth. But it was enough. Jessica's eyes flickered. The certainty faltered in her stare. Marcus shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. Even Liam looked up from his phone for a moment. "All right," I said, my voice smooth, even. I reached out and rested my hand on the folder, but I didn't open it. "But before we do anything, I think we need to hear a few things from my attorney." Jessica's head snapped up. For the first time, I saw genuine alarm in her eyes. "An attorney?" she scoffed, her voice tight. "Samuel, this is a private family matter." I turned my gaze from her to Marcus, then to Liam, and finally to the empty chair beside me, Vivian's chair. I could almost feel her there, watching me, lending me her strength the way she always had. "No," I said, my voice firm, steady, echoing in the boardroom. "It never was." The door behind them clicked shut as they filed out, the tension lingering like smoke after a fire. Jessica's venom still hung in the air, a bitter aftertaste. But my mind wasn't on her. It wasn't on Marcus or Liam, or even the folder still sitting untouched in front of me. My thoughts had already drifted, back 3 days, to the suffocating quiet of my home. The funeral was over. The guests had left, and I had finally walked into the one room I hadn't dared to enter since Vivian's passing. The afternoon sun came through the window in thin shafts, lighting up tiny clouds of dust that floated like little worlds. I wasn't cleaning so much as reaching, touching the things she had used, hoping the objects might hold some of her. I ran my hand over the worn leather of her favorite armchair and traced the titles along the spines of her poetry books. Each small motion felt clumsy. Grief makes you move like you don't know your own hands. I leaned down to pull a heavy book on architecture theory from a low shelf. When my knee bumped the side of Vivian's old wooden desk, the book slipped and hit the floor with a hollow thud. As I bent to pick it up, something in the board of the desk caught my eye. A sliver out of place, a floorboard that did not sit flush with the others. I had walked that room 1,000 times and never seen it, but now in that slanted light it stared at me. My pulse quickened. My knees complained as I knelt. I worked my fingernails into the seam and eased the plank up. The wood lifted with a small, tired groan and revealed a shallow, dark hollow beneath the desk. Inside lay a plain cedar box, no bigger than a shoebox. It felt heavier than it looked, as if the wood had absorbed whatever secrets it held. The lid lifted easily. Cedar and time rose up like an old smell I could almost place. On a faded bed of velvet lay 3 things: a tiny perfect lock of baby hair, dark and soft, tied with a pale blue ribbon, a yellowed hospital birth certificate with the name Samuel Vance Jr. typed on it, and a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed shut. My name, Samuel, was written across the front in Vivian's neat, familiar hand. My hands trembled when I took the envelope. The study had become a room of ghosts. I broke the wax seal and unfolded the pages inside. The letter began with the greeting I knew too well. My dearest Samuel, my love, my only love. Already my throat felt tight. The words were steady on the paper, but they made the world tilt. She wrote that if I was reading the letter, she was gone and she had a burden to lay down. She said she had carried a secret for 48 years, something she had been too afraid to say when she lived. I read on through a fog of tears. She told how the baby they had brought home and named Marcus wasn't the son she had given birth to. Our son, Samuel Jr., had been born weak and had only lived for 6 hours. The doctors told her he was gone while I was in the next room making calls and celebrating a family moment. The pain had been like something else, she wrote, a breaking that didn't stop. From the room next door, she could hear another baby crying, strong and healthy. A nurse named Clara came to her. She said that baby belonged to a frightened young mother who had no one and couldn't keep him. In a moment of grief, so raw it made sense only later as madness, the nurse offered Vivian a choice. She said we could switch the records, that I could take home a healthy boy, that you would never have to know the pain of losing our son. I know it was wrong, the letter went on, but in that moment all I could think of was you. Your face if I had to tell you our child was gone. I could not bear that, so I said yes. We came home with Marcus, and I loved him, Samuel. I loved him as my own. Every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every proud moment, my love for him was real. I kept the secret because I was afraid the truth would break you. I was foolish. I built our family on a lie. The handwriting grew sharper, more urgent. Vivian named names. She wrote about the woman Marcus married, about Jessica's greed and how she had taught Marcus to see the company as theirs rather than something we had all built together. They will try to take everything we made, she warned. Protect what is ours. Protect what is yours. When I finished, the pages slipped from my hands and fell into my lap. The room tipped. For 48 years I had believed one truth about my son. In a few hundred words that truth dissolved. The grief that already ate at me for Vivian suddenly split into two. The old sharp pain for her, and a new, hollow sorrow for a baby I had never known I lost, and for the woman who had kept that secret alone. I could have left it there. I could have taken the easy road, signed the papers in the boardroom, let time soften the edges, let the company slip into Marcus's hands while I faded into the background. But Vivian's final words were not a plea for my surrender. They were a command. Protect what is ours. So I did what she had asked. I reached for the phone. My fingers shook. I scrolled until I found David Chun. Lawyer, yes, but for 30 years more friend than counsel. He picked up on the second ring. Samuel, he said, warm and steady. I was just going to call you. How are you holding up? My voice came out thin, foreign to my own ears. David, there's something I need you to see. I need you here. Now. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. He arrived dressed in muted gray like someone who had been taught never to shout. He took the letter from me with hands that did not tremble. He read, then read again. He listened while I told him everything I had discovered about the cedar box, the lock of hair, the birth certificate. He did not look surprised. He looked grave. We can do this quietly, he said finally. But we have to be thorough. If you want to stop a forced transfer, you need proof, and quickly. The easiest way is DNA. If we can prove Marcus is not your biological son, it changes the whole tone of their claim. It doesn't erase contracts, but it strips them of the story they were using to shame you into signing. And it will expose the motive. I felt relief and unease both. Proof was what Vivian had left me. It was what we would use. David coordinated the tests with a calm that steadied me. He arranged for discreet swabs. No drama, no headlines, just enough to give us truth. He took the lock of hair from the cedar box and sent it, with the birth certificate, to a lab he trusted. He had a phlebotomist ready to take Marcus and Liam's samples. He told me he would handle it so that Jessica wouldn't see suspicion in the way the tests were collected. We did not wait long. 3 days later, with Vivian's letter folded into my coat and the cedar box tucked away where no one would stumble across it by accident, I asked David to come with me to the boardroom. I wanted the truth revealed there where they had tried to steamroll me, where they had slid that folder and smiled like scavengers at a funeral. They were late, as if they had decided the truth could be kept waiting. Jessica was the first to enter, hair like a tight crown, confidence like armor. Marcus followed, fragile and flustered. Liam dragged his feet and scrolled his phone until David's hands laid a slim, official envelope on the table. Before we sign anything, I said, and the room leaned forward as if the table itself wanted to hear me. I asked my attorney to pull some records and run some tests. For the sake of the company and for the sake of the family, I think we need to see the truth together. I slid the envelope toward the center of the table. David opened it. He read the pages once, twice. He folded them slowly and handed the first sheet to Marcus. The room held its breath. Marcus looked down. His face didn't change at first. Then the color left him. He stammered. This can't be right. Jessica's smile was the first thing to die. What is this? She snapped. Some stunt. David's voice was quiet and sharp. The lab compared Vivian's lock of hair, the child she wrote about in her letter, to the buccal swab we took from Marcus. The results show there is no biological relationship between Samuel Vance and Marcus Vance. He pushed a second page across the table. We also checked company records and a set of hospital notes that suggest a swap. We're still verifying chain of custody for those notes, but the DNA result is clear. Jessica went white. For a second she tried to laugh it off, a short, incredulous sound that fell flat. DNA tests can be wrong, she snapped. There are errors. This lab. Then ask for another test, David said. But you should know, we used a certified lab. We used controls. We used Vivian's hair. If your argument is that Marcus is the rightful heir because he was raised here, that is a moral argument, not a biological one. But you cannot keep demanding I sign away what my wife asked me to protect when the foundation of your claim, blood, may be false. Marcus's voice came out small. Dad, No, Marcus, I said. You do not get to ask me to hand over my life because of someone else's greed. I raised you. I loved you. That will not change. But love does not mean I will let someone take what Vivian and I built. Liam stared at his phone, then looked up, suddenly aware of the room. He shuffled his feet, embarrassed. Around us, the board members shifted. Some mouthed words. Others looked at Jessica, waiting to see if she would produce some paperwork to counter the bomb that had just detonated in their center. Jessica's face had turned hard, then furious. You're lying, she said. This is manipulation. You've been manipulated. Maybe, David said. Maybe there's more. But the letter, the hair, the certificate, those are not fabricated by a widow at her husband's bedside. They are on paper and in blood. If you want to continue this, we will, in court and in public. But I suggest everyone take a breath. What happened after that was not a neat, cinematic collapse. There were phone calls and angry words and promises to consult legal counsel. There was a frantic reach for documents Jessica thought would shore up her plan. There were board members who circled toward me like animals towards a safer leader. Some offered condolences. One or two offered to step aside rather than be part of a family fight. When they left, shoulders hunched and faces pale, the room felt different. The folder Jessica had slid across the table was still there, unopened. Like a confession, she could not bear to read now that the ground had shifted. I sat back and let the swell of fatigue come. The cedar box was under my chair where I had put it that morning. I held Vivian's letter as if it were a map. She had given me the truth and a mission. She had not asked me to punish a boy who had done nothing but live. She had asked me to protect what we had built. I would do that. I would do it the way she would have wanted, slow, sharp, and honest. The road ahead was ugly. There would be hearings, explanations, and wounds that might never heal. But for the first time since we buried Vivian, I felt steady. The grief did not leave me. It sat beside me like a faithful dog. But under it now was resolve. Vivian had shared her shame, so it could be my shield. I would use it, not to destroy a family, but to keep the promise I had once made to the woman who had trusted me more than anyone. Outside, the light was moving across the lawn. Inside, I folded the letter and slid it back into the cream envelope. The world had changed color, but it had not been ruined. Not yet. I need you. Can you talk? The warmth in David's voice disappeared instantly, sharpened into professional focus. Of course. What is it? Is it Marcus and Jessica? Are they already pressing you? He knew them too well. Worse, I said. My breath shook as if it were carrying stones. David, I found something. A letter. From Vivian. On the other end of the line, I heard him inhale sharply. I couldn't bring myself to read the whole thing aloud. The words were still too raw, too jagged in my mouth. So I gave him only the center of the wound. She wrote that our son, Samuel Jr., died at the hospital the day he was born. Silence. A silence so heavy I could almost hear him standing at his office window, staring out at the Atlanta skyline, trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, wrapped in disbelief and grief. My God, Samuel. I swallowed hard. The words scraped their way out. Marcus, he's not mine, David. He's not our son. Vivian, she made a choice. In all that pain, she made a choice. I explained the story of the switch. Each word felt like ash, burning in my throat as I spoke them aloud for the first time. For a long moment, David wasn't my lawyer. He was my friend, the man who had sat at my dinner table, toasted birthdays with us, laughed with Vivian in the kitchen. His voice was quiet, reverent. That incredible woman. The weight she must have carried all those years, Samuel. To protect you. To build a family. I can't imagine. He paused, and I could hear his own grief in the silence. I am so sorry. But then I heard him take a deeper breath, steadying himself. The warmth of the friend slid back, and in its place came the clarity of the lawyer I had leaned on for 30 years. His tone changed, sharpened. Samuel, he said, Vivian wasn't just confessing. She was arming you. That letter, it's not only her truth. It's a weapon she left in your hands. Now we have to use it. Through the fog of my grief, something pierced hope. Not wild, not soft, but a cold, clean blade. David was right. This wasn't just an ending. It was a plan. What do we do? My voice was hoarse. Jessica will fight this. She'll say it's just the ramblings of a sick woman. She'll call it forgery. She'll tear it apart. She'll try, David replied. There was the faintest hint of satisfaction in his voice, like a man sharpening his sword before battle. Which is why the letter is our map, not our weapon. The weapon has to be irrefutable. Science, Samuel. DNA. The thought rattled me. How? How can we even manage that? Without raising suspicion. Leave it to me, David said. Calm, decisive. Hospitals keep records for decades. Marcus had his tonsils out when he was 8. I'd wager they still have tissue samples archived. We can get a court order for that. Compare it against your own medical baseline. Clean. Quiet. Undeniable. The fog inside me began to thin. A path was clearing, piece by piece. And the other part? I asked, barely whispering. Her real son. I'll hire a private investigator first thing in the morning, David said without hesitation. The best. Someone who specializes in finding people who don't want to be found. Vivian gave us a date, a hospital, and the circumstances. Nearly 50 years ago. Yes, but not an empty haystack. We can find him, Samuel. We will. When I ended the call, I just sat there in the study, the letter still trembling in my hands. The grief was still inside me, vast and endless, but something had changed. It was no longer a weight pressing me down into the floor. It was a blade, sharp and steady, waiting for me to wield it. Vivian had not left me alone. She had left me her truth. She had left me a shield, a sword, and a general to help me fight. The next time I faced Jessica and Marcus, it would not be as a broken old man signing his life away. No, it would be an ambush. They just didn't know it yet. It's incredible, Mr. Vance. We're using those new composite framing materials you approved. It cuts costs, sure, but more importantly, it makes the units stronger and more energy efficient. Families are going to save real money every month on utilities. That's not just construction, sir. That's dignity. That's quality of life. The way his eyes lit when he said it, it wasn't numbers on a spreadsheet to him. It wasn't a political checkbox or a PR stunt. It was people. It was legacy. I felt a knot tighten in my throat. This young man, who had come up through our ranks with nothing but grit and brains, spoke with more conviction about the true heart of the company than my own blood ever had. I nodded, swallowing against the ache in my chest. Keep pushing on it, Elijah. Don't let the board cut corners. Not on this. He gave me that same respectful, almost bashful smile. You've got my word, Mr. Vance. As long as I'm here, this stays part of the plan. For a moment, the din of the site, the pounding hammers, the grinding saws, faded into the background. I saw Vivian's face in my memory, her eyes shining when we cut the ribbon on our first housing project. Protect what is ours, she had written. And here, standing in front of me, was a glimpse of what that could mean. When I finally walked back to my car, I moved slower, my old boots caked in mud. The grief was still heavy, but in its shadow was something else, a dangerous, electric thought. Marcus may have been my son by law, but he wasn't the future of this company. And for the first time since opening that box in the study, I realized I might already know who was. David Chin placed the briefcase gently on the table, the leather creaking like an old friend. He didn't bother to sit. Instead, he straightened his cuffs and spoke in that deliberate, measured tone that had won jury after jury to his side. Good afternoon, he said. My apologies for the delay. Samuel and I had some urgent matters to discuss before this meeting. Jessica's eyes narrowed, the veneer of her poise already cracking. This is a private family matter, Mr. Chun. Your presence is neither required nor appropriate. David didn't so much as blink. He flipped open the brass clasps of his briefcase with 2 clean clicks, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence. On the contrary, Mrs. Vance, he replied evenly. This is very much a legal matter. And I assure you, my presence here is both required and appropriate. The blood drained slightly from Marcus's face. Liam shifted in his chair, suddenly attentive, his eyes darting between his mother and David. David drew out a single folder, its edges crisp, its weight undeniable. He placed it on the table, directly beside Jessica's untouched transfer documents. Before anyone makes irrevocable decisions, certain clarifications are in order. He opened the folder with a practiced hand, revealing neatly organized pages. This, for example, is a request for judicial preservation of hospital records, specifically those pertaining to Marcus Vance's childhood procedures. And this, he slid another document forward, is a court-approved chain of custody for genetic testing. The words genetic testing hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jessica froze, her face an iron mask barely concealing panic. Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. David's eyes never left them. It would be premature of me to discuss the results here today. But suffice it to say, the evidence is being gathered, and when it is complete, it will speak with an authority greater than opinion, greater than manipulation. It will speak with science. He let the silence linger, then closed the folder with quiet finality. So before anyone presses Samuel Vance to sign over control of this company, I would suggest a pause. The truth, after all, has a way of rearranging inheritance. My heart pounded, but I kept my face calm, unreadable. Vivian's words echoed inside me. This secret was once my shame, but now it must be your shield. And for the first time, I saw the flicker of true fear in Jessica's eyes. The words hit like a hammer. The final and legally binding will and testament of Vivian Vance. Jessica's carefully painted smile faltered. She tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle, hollow. A will, she scoffed. Vivian's estate is hardly relevant here. We're talking about the company. This, she jabbed a manicured finger toward the folder, is a distraction. David didn't so much as blink. He opened the folder, his fingertips precise and reverent. On the contrary, Mrs. Vance. The company is very much part of her estate, and Mrs. Vance was quite specific in her instructions. He slid the first page across the polished mahogany toward me, not to Jessica, not to Marcus, but to me. His choice was deliberate. The paper whispered across the table like a secret escaping. Jessica leaned forward, straining to read upside down. Her eyes narrowed as the words reached her brain. Her lips moved, forming the lines she didn't want to believe. Marcus shifted in his chair. Jessica, he murmured, his voice low, uncertain. But she silenced him with a glance sharp enough to cut glass. David's voice remained steady, surgical. Mrs. Vance was clear. Until the matter of succession is resolved in full compliance with her will, no transfer of shares, no changes in leadership, and no redistribution of assets shall occur. Any attempt to circumvent these terms will be considered a violation of probate law and prosecuted accordingly. He let the words sink in, then closed the folder with the same deliberate weight he had opened it. Thud. The sound carried finality. Jessica's face had gone pale beneath her foundation. The predator's smile was gone, replaced by something raw and dangerous, cornered desperation. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a hiss. This is a farce. She was dying. She was confused. Careful. David cut in smoothly, his voice still calm but edged with steel. Are you suggesting Mrs. Vance was incompetent when she signed her will? Because if you are, I will be happy to enter into evidence the battery of medical assessments affirming her full mental clarity in the weeks before her passing. For the first time, Jessica blinked. Marcus looked down at the table, his finger tracing the grain again. Liam, of all people, was the only one staring openly, wide-eyed, his phone forgotten in his lap. I sat in silence, my hand resting on the blue folder. It was warm beneath my palm, as if Vivian herself was there beside me, whispering courage. David straightened, gathering the room in his gaze. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, "Vivian Vance may be gone, but her voice still speaks, and it will be heard." "It was written, signed, and witnessed 6 months ago," David said. He let that fact hang in the air like smoke. 6 months. Not a last-minute scribble from a weak mind. Not a whim of a dying woman. This was something Vivian had thought about, planned, and carried out with full awareness. It was careful. It was deliberate. Jessica gave a sharp laugh, high and thin. The kind of laugh people use when they're nervous but don't want to show it. "Oh, come now, David. Don't be so dramatic," she said, waving her hand like she was brushing away a child's nonsense. Her voice dripped with scorn. "We all know what Vivian's will says. It's tied to the old family trust. Nothing new. Everything gets divided the way it always has. Marcus gets control of his shares, as he should. As his wife, my future is secure. Samuel gets his piece, enough to be taken care of. It's been arranged for years. This is nothing more than a formality." She leaned back in her chair, smug, convinced she still had the upper hand. To her, this was nothing but a speed bump in her road to power. A detail, a piece of paper with no bite. I watched her, and for a moment I felt something close to pity. She was blind. She was so focused on the throne she believed she had already claimed, she didn't see the ground shifting beneath her. She had always underestimated Vivian. And now, she was about to learn the price of that mistake. David looked at her, his face calm, unreadable. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He only said 4 words. "You are mistaken, Mrs. Vance." Quiet. Simple. But it struck the room like a gavel slamming in a courtroom. Then, slowly, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a pair of slim black-framed glasses. He slid them on, steady and unhurried, the way a teacher does before correcting a foolish student. The boardroom was silent. You could hear the air conditioner humming, the faint creak of leather chairs as people shifted. All eyes were on David. He opened the blue folder. Vivian's folder. "I, Vivian Vance, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." His voice was formal at first, the tone of law. But then, as he read, it changed. Softer, warmer. The first part wasn't about money or property. It was a letter. "To my beloved husband, Samuel," David read, and at once the air in the room shifted. It was as if Vivian herself had stepped into the boardroom. "You were the architect of my joy, the foundation of my life. With you, I built a home not of wood and steel, but of love, laughter, and unwavering partnership. For 49 years, you were my compass and my anchor. I leave you with my unending love, the only true asset that can never be appraised, divided, or diminished by time. Please know, whatever comes next, that every choice I ever made was to protect the beautiful world we built together." My eyes closed, just for a moment, as the words washed over me. That was Vivian. Always steady, always careful, always thinking of me even when she was gone. Her voice, her love, carried into this cold boardroom and wrapped around me like armor. Jessica shifted impatiently, the sound of her bracelet clinking on the table. To her, this was pointless sentiment, a waste of time. She didn't care about love or legacy. She wanted numbers, titles, signatures. Then David cleared his throat, and his tone changed. The warmth drained away. His voice sharpened, cool and precise. "Now," he said, adjusting his glasses and looking directly at Jessica, "regarding the distribution of tangible and intangible assets." Jessica leaned forward, eyes glinting. This was what she had been waiting for. The part she thought she already knew. But she didn't know. Not yet. David began to read slowly, carefully, giving every word the weight of a hammer falling on steel. "All my personal assets," David read slowly, each word measured, "including but not limited to real estate, investment portfolios, and personal effects, along with all my shares in Vance and Sons Construction and all associated voting rights, shall be transferred in their entirety to my beloved husband, Samuel Vance." He paused, just for a beat, long enough to let the words echo through the boardroom. Across the table, Jessica's lips curled into a small smile. Triumph flashed in her eyes. To her, this was confirmation. If everything fell to me, then in her mind, it was only a matter of time before she and Marcus got it all anyway. She saw the inheritance as a bridge that led straight to her throne. She thought the game was already over. Then David's voice dropped lower. Calm, precise, cutting. And, he continued, to my direct bloodline heir, should one be identified. The air changed. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, like a thick blanket pressed down over the entire table. Marcus frowned, blinking at David. Confusion furrowed his brow. He looked like a man who had missed the turn in the road but kept on driving, unaware of the cliff ahead. Jessica's smile faltered, just slightly. Suspicion tugged at the edges of her face. Direct bloodline heir? She repeated, forcing out a short laugh. What kind of strange wording is that? It's just archaic legal jargon. Obviously, it refers to Marcus. She turned her sharp gaze to her husband, daring him to disagree. Marcus gave a hesitant nod. Right, he said, his voice too thin, too uncertain. That's me. I'm her direct bloodline. But the words hung in the air without conviction. They didn't see it. Not yet. They were blinded by their own certainty, their own arrogance. They thought Vivian had written them a shield. They couldn't see that what she had actually crafted was a sword, and the tip of that blade was pointed straight at them. David removed his glasses, folded them carefully, and placed them on the table with deliberate precision. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, almost gentle, but dangerous in its calm. That, he said, is precisely the point that requires clarification. He reached into his open briefcase, but this time he did not bring out another folder of legal papers. Instead, he withdrew a single sealed envelope. Thick, official, 9 by 12. The return address bore the name of a certified genetics laboratory. He placed the envelope on the table. It landed with a dull weight, a block of truth in a room full of lies. My firm, David explained, his tone steady, was instructed by Mrs. Vance in a separate legal directive, executed the very same day as this will, to engage an independent laboratory. With the full authorization and cooperation of Mr. Samuel Vance, a thorough genealogical analysis was conducted. Its sole purpose was to legally and scientifically identify the beneficiary as explicitly defined by the phrase direct bloodline heir. The envelope sat there between us, stark against the polished mahogany. White, innocent, deadly. It looked like a time bomb, its fuse already lit. David's movements were exact, almost ritualistic. He retrieved a silver letter opener from his briefcase. With one clean stroke, he slid the blade beneath the flap of the envelope. Rip. The tearing paper was sharp, final. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. Every eye in the room locked onto that envelope. Even Liam, usually lost behind the glow of his phone, was frozen, his gaze wide and fixed. He knew, even if he didn't yet understand, that this moment mattered, that this was history cracking open in front of him. David reached inside and drew out a single sheet of paper. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic, just a plain white lab report. Columns of numbers, technical language, the kind of cold clinical document that hides its power behind dry terminology. But in that moment, it might as well have been the sword of Damocles. He put his glasses back on. The small, familiar motion now carried unbearable weight, like the final act of a judge preparing to read a verdict. His eyes scanned the page. His face gave away nothing. Then, slowly he looked up, over the tops of his glasses. First at Marcus, then at Jessica, and he waited. One last agonizing second. When David spoke, his voice was flat, completely neutral. No inflection, no emotion. It was the voice of a man stating a simple fact, unchangeable and final. Pursuant to the side-by-side analysis of genetic markers from Sample A, identified as Samuel Vance, and Sample B, identified as Marcus Vance, He read slowly, letting each word hang in the air. The conclusion of the genealogical assessment is as follows. He paused. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud and relentless. The probability of the subject, Marcus Vance, being the biological son of the subject, Samuel Vance, is 0%. The words dropped into the room like boulders thrown into a still pond. Silence followed. Absolute, suffocating silence. For a single breathless moment, nothing moved. There was only the ringing in my ears, the impossible weight of that number. 0.0. And then the breaking began. It started quietly, with Marcus. His face went pale. First gray, then white, then drained of everything. His jaw slackened. His lips trembled. Slowly, his head shook, almost involuntarily at first. Then faster, more violently, as if he could physically shake the truth out of his body. No, he whispered, barely audible. The sound was strangled, broken. No, that can't be. It's a lie. He looked at me, his eyes wide, pleading like a child lost in the middle of a storm. Mom would never. Every memory of his life, the birthdays, the milestones, the moments we had shared, crashed down around him. His identity, the foundation of who he thought he was, had turned to dust. While Marcus unraveled, Jessica erupted. A guttural, furious scream tore from her throat. She shot out of her chair, the legs scraping harshly against the polished wood floor. Her face, moments ago a mask of confident smugness, was now twisted in rage, teeth bared and eyes wild. Her perfectly manicured finger jabbed toward me. You did this, she screamed. This is your sick trick. You forged this. You couldn't stand to see us take over, so you made up this disgusting lie. You cowardly, evil old man. The venom in her words tried to reach me, to claw at me. But it did nothing. I remained still, an immovable rock in the storm, silent and watching. This was exactly what David and I had anticipated. This was the predictable chaos of a cornered predator, the tantrum of a thief caught red-handed. David, calm and unshaken, let her scream for a few moments, letting her expend the first fury of her hysteria. Then, with the precision of a surgeon, he cut through her noise. He ignored her completely. His attention moved past the drama to the one person truly wounded in the room. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the simple blue folder still lying on the table, the one containing Vivian's letter. With a quiet, fluid motion, he slid it across the polished mahogany. It glided smoothly over the wood and stopped directly in front of Marcus' trembling hands. David looked at me, then raised his voice just enough for the entire room to hear. Quiet, yet commanding. Every word crystal clear. Your son might want to read this, he said. It's an explanation from his mother. Jessica's rage sputtered. Her screams dissolved into incoherent, venomous whispers. Her threats, her accusations, her power, all of it evaporated. The cold, hard science on the page, backed by Vivian's voice from beyond the grave, had left her with nothing. The room felt different now. Still, heavy. The tide had shifted. The game had changed. And at the center of it all, Marcus finally dared to lift the letter, his hands shaking, his eyes brimming with tears, ready to confront the truth his mother had carried for decades. All of Jessica's energy, all her fury, now turned to Marcus, urging him to fight, to deny it, to claw back some shred of control. But he couldn't. He was bent over the blue folder, shoulders shaking, silent sobs racking his body as he read the words his mother had left for him. Each line cut deeper than the last, unraveling the life he thought he knew. He was no longer the scheming son, no longer a co-conspirator in someone else's greed. He was simply a man broken by truth, mourning a life he had never lived and a mother he had never truly understood. David allowed the room to breathe, letting the tragic weight of Vivian's confession settle over us. The silence was thick, almost sacred, as Marcus quietly crumpled into grief. Then David straightened his tie, the air shifting around him. He spoke again, calm and inexorable, slicing through the silence like a blade. This was not for Jessica, not for Marcus. He was stating the facts, the final, unassailable truth. As I stated, he began, his voice steady and unwavering. The will of Mrs. Vivian Vance is explicit. Her assets, her legacy, and her controlling shares in this company are to pass to her direct bloodline heir. He glanced at Marcus briefly, his expression carrying a muted sympathy, professional and restrained. As DNA evidence confirms, Marcus Vance is not a biological relation. Therefore, he is legally excluded from this specific and primary inheritance clause. Jessica's eyes flickered, the first cracks of desperation appearing. She calculated, quickly and frantically. If Marcus wasn't the heir, she reasoned, then perhaps the inheritance would revert to a general family trust. Perhaps there was still a chance. A new plan. Years of litigation. But she had not yet grasped the full depth of Vivian's strategy. David's voice anticipated her thoughts. The will further stipulates, he continued, letting the words hang in the air, deliberate and sharp, that in the absence of the primary heir, the entire inheritance shall pass to the biological heir, should one be identified. The weight of that phrase landed like a hammer. A final, cruel twist aimed straight at Jessica. Her moment of hope dissolved, replaced with stunned disbelief. David slowly, deliberately turned his head toward the boardroom door. And we have identified him. As if summoned by the words themselves, the doorknob turned. The heavy oak door swung open, and there he stood. Elijah Hayes. He looked bewildered, out of place in the sterile, tense boardroom, yet his posture was straight, quietly dignified. He wore the simple uniform of the construction site, a collared shirt embroidered with the Vance and Sons logo, clean but clearly worn from a day's work, his boots marked by dust and grit. The world of steel, concrete, and labor had been pulled from him and placed here, into the heart of greed and broken family drama. His eyes scanned the room, taking in Jessica's tear-streaked, rage-filled face. Marcus collapsed, broken form, and finally settling on me. A silent question lingered in his gaze, uncertain but alive. David's voice rang out once more, formal, unyielding, sealing the moment and their fate. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone carrying the authority of law and inevitability, "allow me to introduce Elijah Hayes, the biological son of Samuel and Vivian Vance." The room felt utterly still. Not tense, not loud, just shock. A silence so deep it pressed against the walls, heavy and suffocating. Jessica and Marcus stared at Elijah as if he were a ghost. He wasn't just a man standing in the doorway. He was the living embodiment of everything they had tried to claim, everything they had plotted for, and everything they had lost. In that moment, the balance of power, the legacy of 49 years, and Vivian's final plan all crystallized in one undeniable truth. The rightful heir was here, and nothing would ever be the same again. Elijah stood there, a living impossibility made real. A figure from a past no one in the room had ever known, now stepping forward to claim what was rightfully his. David spoke next, delivering the final, irrefutable details. Our private investigation, following the leads left by Mrs. Vance, located Mr. Hayes last month. We also obtained the personal diaries of his birth mother. In them, she recorded the circumstances of his birth and adoption. Every fact has been cross-referenced and legally verified. That was it. The trap had been sprung. The final piece of Vivian's plan had clicked into place. I pushed my chair back, the scrape loud in the sudden silence, and stood. I felt taller, stronger than I had in years. Every eye in the room turned toward me, including Elijah's. I ignored Jessica. I ignored Marcus, who still crouched over the blue folder, sobbing and broken. My gaze was only for Elijah. In his face, in the strong line of his jaw and the sharp intelligence in his eyes, I saw her. I saw Vivian. I saw the son I had never known, finally standing before me. I walked around the long mahogany table, each step closing a gap of 50 years. When I reached him, I stopped. This young man, good, decent, and capable, was mine by blood, by destiny, and by the design of the woman we had both loved. I placed my hands on his shoulders. "Hello, son," I said, my voice carrying a lifetime of loss and a future full of hope. "I've been waiting a very long time for you." The words ignited the final inferno. For Jessica, seeing me place my hands on Elijah's shoulders, claiming him, recognizing him, was unbearable. Her last shred of icy control shattered instantly. A sound tore from her throat, half scream, half sob, raw and primal. Her face, pale with shock just moments before, now flushed red with rage and disbelief. "No," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You can't. You think you can just do this? Replace your son, replace your family with this nobody." She stepped toward Elijah, hands curled into claws, but David moved silently to intercept her, a calm barrier between the past and the present. "He's a fraud, a con artist," she yelled. Then she turned her finger on me. "And you? You're a pathetic old man, twisted by grief. You'd rather burn down your own family than admit you've lost control. I'll sue you. I'll tell the world what you've done." Her words were empty. They were the flailing of a drowning woman, the desperate thrashing of someone who had already lost everything that truly mattered. As I watched her, I realized she had never looked at Marcus, never cared for him. Her only concern had been money, power, and control, and now both had slipped through her fingers. Marcus, meanwhile, had retreated into his own private hell, his face buried in his hands, shoulders trembling, fingers clutching the crumpled pages of Vivian's letter. His sobs were the only real, human sound left on his side of the table. In that moment, he was not a villain. He was a casualty, a man of 48 realizing the life he had known was built on a lie. Seeing the chaos, David quietly pulled out his cell phone and pressed a single button. It was a prearranged call to building security, the final precaution for a room full of shattered egos and exposed greed. While we waited, David spoke one last time. His voice cut cleanly through Jessica's ongoing screams, calm and precise. He addressed Marcus, though it was clear the man barely heard him. "The will makes one final provision," David said. Out of what she described as a mother's lingering affection, Vivian stipulated that a modest monthly stipend be made available to Marcus Vance from a private trust. It is enough to live on, but not in luxury. This, however, is conditional. He must enroll in psychological counseling and agree legally to have no contact with either Mr. Samuel Vance or Mr. Elijah Hayes. David's gaze then shifted to Jessica, cold and unflinching. "The will makes no provision for non-relations by marriage in this event. You, Mrs. Vance, are entitled to absolutely nothing." At that moment, the security guards arrived. Two large, impassive men in professional uniforms. Their presence was a silent statement, unarguable. It was over. Jessica let out one last scream, a long, piercing howl of pure defeat, as the guards gently but firmly took her by the arms. She continued to yell threats and curses as they escorted her from the room. Marcus didn't even look up. He allowed himself to be guided to his feet, a hollow, shuffling wreck, his face buried in his hands. They led him out of the boardroom, out of my life, and out of the world I had been trying to protect. Silence followed. Complete, ringing, unbelievable silence. I looked around the room. The table was a mess, scattered documents, overturned water glasses, chaos frozen in time. And then I noticed something else. Liam's chair was empty. He hadn't been escorted out. He had simply disappeared. No grand exit, no confrontation, just the quiet, cowardly retreat of a boy whose only loyalty had ever been to an inheritance. It was the simplest, saddest truth in the room. The boardroom door clicked shut. That single sound was louder than anything else, a declaration of finality. The storm was over. The war had ended. The ghosts of greed, of anger, of entitlement had been purged, leaving behind not emptiness but peace, a space to start again. David stepped up, placing a firm, steady hand on my shoulder. "It's done, Samuel," he said quietly. "Vivian would be proud." I nodded, my throat too thick with emotion to speak. He gave my shoulder one final reassuring squeeze, then looked between me and Elijah. He knew this was a moment for us alone. "I'll go file the preliminary paperwork," he said, offering a small, knowing smile before gathering his things and leaving. And then there were two, just Elijah and me, standing in the quiet boardroom, separated by 50 years of secrets and strangership. The air was heavy with the weight of decades. How do you begin after something like this? What do you even say? It was Elijah who broke the silence first, his voice tentative, disbelief lacing every word. "Mr. Vance, I don't know what to say." I turned to face him fully, and for the first time, I let myself truly see him. I saw the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his posture, and a faint echo of Vivian's smile that nearly brought me to my knees. "Neither do I, son," I said gently. "Why don't we start with our names? I'm Samuel." He began to tell me about his life, about his adoptive parents, a kind couple who had given him a good home but had passed away years ago. He spoke of growing up seeing the Vance and Sons logo on construction sites around the city, a symbol of permanence and strength in a world that often felt uncertain. He confessed that he had always felt an inexplicable pull toward the company, a quiet admiration for the unseen man who had built things that lasted. When I applied for the job, he said, a look of wonder on his face. It didn't feel like just getting a job. It felt like I was coming home. I just didn't know why. I listened, and I understood. The invisible threads of a mother's love, the destiny Vivian had set in motion so long ago, had drawn this good young man toward me, even when I didn't know he existed. It was a miracle, plain and simple. I knew then that I didn't need him to call me father. I didn't want to burden him with a lifetime of expectation. What I wanted was for him to understand what we were truly fighting for. "Elijah," I said, my voice steady, "your mother's legacy in mind. It's not just about money or buildings or a title on a door. It's about creating things that matter, things that last. It's in the heart of a home where a family feels safe. It's in the strength of a bridge that connects a community." I looked him straight in the eye. "I've seen that same builder's heart in you since the day you first walked into my office. Will you help me keep building?" A slow smile spread across his face, and in it I saw hope for the future. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice quiet but powerful. "I would be honored." I walked to the great window that overlooked the city, a tapestry of buildings stretching to the horizon, so many of them rising from dust and determination under my watch. Elijah came to stand beside me. We looked out at the skyline together. For a moment, I spoke more to myself than to him. I thought this was all about justice. But it's not. It's about forgiveness. Forgiving Vivian for carrying such a heavy secret all those years just to protect me. And forgiving myself for being blind to the son who was standing in front of me all along. My legacy was safe, not because it was passed to my bloodline, but because it was passed to a man who shared my spirit. Vivian's will had been a map, and it had led us here. It was never just about blood. It was about heart. In the reflection of the glass, I saw an old man and a young man standing side by side. A past full of secrets had finally found its peace, and a future I never thought I'd have was just beginning to be built. This story teaches us that the most valuable inheritance is not money or a company, but a legacy of integrity and purpose. Greed and disrespect lead to ruin, but true worth is proven by actions and the goodness in a person's heart. Bonds built on love, trust, and shared values are stronger than blood.